So this section will be recorded. The presentations will be recorded. However, the breakout rooms will not be recorded. All right. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we'll be having Akiko Minaga. She's the Director of Explainers at the Exploratorium. And then after her, we'll have Hallie Scott, Associate Director of Academic Programs at the Hammer Museum in UCLA. So please give a warm welcome to Akiko Minaga.
Hello, can everyone hear me and can everyone see the screen? Just doing a quick, just nod your heads if you can see. Yes, great. All right, well, I'll get started right away. Welcome. I'm going to be doing a little presentation on landing the job, and I will get right to it. So first, I'll just start with who I am, why I'm here. So I'm the Director of Explainers at the Exploratorium. And while the major core of my job is to direct and develop strategy and fundraise for interpretive programs at the Exploratorium, I also oversee all the hiring processes for my team. So I do a fair amount of direct hiring, as well as just overseeing all the managers who also hire. I currently direct a group with over 100 people, and I've also hired 5 managers in the last 2 years. And I've done all the stages of the hiring process. So it's writing job descriptions, reviewing resumes, phone screens, interviews, practicums, reference checking, and then accepting or handing out acceptances or rejecting people. So this is, I've done it, I've seen it all. And also salary negotiation, which we'll talk a little bit about. So something to note is I write every job description, which means that I determine all the responsibilities and qualifications for every role in my department, which means that I set the bar for what kind of candidate we are seeking to attract. So here's what I'll be talking about today. So here are the kind of all the stages, as well as some extra tips at the bottom. So first, we'll start with applying. So the general bullet here is follow instructions. It sounds basic, but this is surprisingly, something that I really emphasize is important. Make sure you read the job description thoroughly and to the end, and make sure you note things like start dates, end dates, minimum requirements, eligibility, and salary. And just because before you make the effort of applying, you have to understand all the terms, because I actually have stopped interviews if it becomes clear that an applicant can't do the job because they aren't available to work the schedule or aren't eligible for a reason that is clearly listed on the job description. So please, make sure you note that. I've also had interviews where people's questions for me are wasted on information that is actually listed in the job description. At best, it wastes your opportunity to ask a good question. And at worst, it actually makes you look like you don't know what you're applying for. So make sure you read the job description and keep that in mind as you are moving through the process. When applying, here are kind of the 3 things that I would recommend. 1, apply early. Many jobs have application deadlines, and if they don't, so if they're open till filled, applying early is actually even more crucial, because it means applicants are being considered on a rolling basis. So by the time you see the job description, they might already be getting ready to interview people. Once I have a bunch of great candidates lined up to interview, I don't always wait until the deadline day to see what else came in. I'm actually just going to go ahead and start scheduling interviews. I also already know going in how many people I'm going to screen or interview for the first round. So if there are only a certain amount of spots, and if I have 20, even if I have 20 great candidates, I usually will only have time to screen like maybe at best 7 or 10. Then if any of the candidates, if they fall through, I don't want to pull them through, then I'll go through the resumes to ensure that I have enough people to interview. So know that as a candidate, you're actually already decreasing your odds if you apply late. Of course, if you don't see it in the posting early, it can't be helped, but know that applying early is always an advantage to the applicant. Make sure you answer all the questions. So online applications often have a few questions. Sometimes they're practical, sometimes they're icebreakery. Never skip the questions. Don't treat it as a throwaway. Actually answer it, because those questions, everything is read at this stage. And of course, please follow instructions. So this can be anything from like, don't call about this position, or maybe it's about adding a certain email address to your safe senders box. Make sure you're following all those instructions once you've submitted your application. Oh, cover letters. Yes, you should have one. So these are pretty basic, but I will say them anyway. Please continue to follow business letter format. Even if you're writing in a text box in an online application, as best as you can, just use the formatting. Make sure your cover letter is easy to read. Does not have to be long. You can be brief. Because if it actually looks too long, the more likely I'm just gonna skim through it rather than actually read everything. I recommend that you show personal side if you can, and also don't narrate your resume. If I can get it from your resume, don't tell me about it here. This is actually a great opportunity to showcase things like your motivation for wanting the position, your connection to the museum or the institution, maybe a brief story that illustrates why you'd be great for this job that's not on your resume. And then I would also recommend just make sure your cover letter is free of errors. You know, the further you go in your career, the more likely you're going to be scrutinized in your ability to communicate in the written form effectively. And this is actually a big test of that. Resumes, it should be very clear. I can't emphasize this enough. Even if the format is boring, if I can read it and it makes sense to me, that's all that matters into the functionality of a resume. I've never hired someone because their resume format was better than someone else's, but I have stopped reading a resume all the way through because it was impossible to read. So unless you are a graphic designer, artist, or extremely confident about your formatting and layout skills, just use the basic resume format. Google Docs has some basic ones. The other recommendation is, unless you're applying for a position where your ability to design something or your artistic viewpoint is being considered as part of your qualifications, it's better to keep the basic format and keep it easy to read. You know, hiring managers, I'm sure people know this, spend a very short amount of time on reading resumes, and I will concur, at least for myself, this is true. I treat it, it's almost like a reading comprehension test where you are looking for the answers in the text, because when reading through, I am looking for indicators or specific experience or qualifications. And if I don't see it, I'm not going to move you to the next round. So make sure that you put the most important skills, your most relevant experience high on your resume, even if it doesn't necessarily follow the linear chronology. At least for me, understanding that you have the experience is actually more important than what order your career went in. So because if I have questions about that, I'm either going to read your resume one more time, or I'll just ask you in the interview. So, you know, and given that resumes are read quickly, a great way to show that you are a fit is to mirror some of the language in your resume that it describes your experience in the job description. So if you see the language in the job description, try to mirror some of that language in your experience if you are able to do so. Here's just a basic example, a template, the kind of resume. This, you can see this is super easy to read, very clear, lots of space. If you have more than 10 years of experience, you can add a second page, but I would also say include that only if it's relevant towards the position or you want to demonstrate something. Otherwise, maybe just keep it off the resume. Interviews. I do a lot of these. If you've got one, you're qualified. Here are the things that I'm checking for. And there are two types of interviews that I give. One is a screen. This is usually a phone call or maybe it's a Zoom call. The basic tenet is, these are the things I'm checking for. One, are you professional? And two, how are you at basic verbal communication? These are the things I'm checking for, but these are the things that you can do to make sure that you are showing up in that way. So make sure you check your tech, be on time, show interest or enthusiasm, show me that you care, and then at the end, ask a good question. And then once you blow me away with the screen, I will invite you for an in-person interview. So make sure going in, if you can, find out who is interviewing you. And if possible, find out what order or combination you're going to be interviewed in, because sometimes interviews can be all in one group. Maybe it's in order, you know, one person and then another person. This can actually help determine what kinds of questions you're going to be asked and help you determine what kinds of questions you might want to ask the interviewers. Make sure you take some notes. Sometimes it helps to jot down what the question was or keywords from the question so you can focus your answers. And then make sure you have 3 to 4 thoughtful questions for your interviews prepared. It's actually okay to not have those memorized. You can write those down and refer to them, but make sure you have those prepared. Make sure that you ask yourself, what qualities do you want to show your interviewers? That you're a good leader, that you get things done. Whatever these are, make sure you have some stories prepared that showcase this. Just because humans by nature, we're storytellers, we remember stories better than like a list of qualities. So instead of saying, oh, I'm a good leader and I'm trustworthy, but tell me a story, because you want to be memorable. I'm likely going to be interviewing, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 other people. So you want to stand out. So make sure you have some stories prepared. And I'll talk more about this in the breakout session later about how to prepare that. And then lastly, of course, you won't know all the questions that the interviewers are going to be giving you up front, but there are some questions that are almost always asked. And you should actually have these questions very well prepared. There should be no stumbling or confusing answers. If a hiring manager asks you things like, tell me about yourself, or tell me about why you want this position, or what made you apply for this position, you should have those answers well rehearsed and ready to go. And the last part is some extras. So these don't always apply to every situation, but I wanted to kind of throw in these things. So references, make sure you have always at least 3. At least one should be a former supervisor. So make sure you keep in touch with your old supervisors, maintain positive relationships as much as possible. Another example could be a current colleague. It's better if they are in some kind of managerial or leadership role, especially if you're trying to land that type of role, since it implies that they understand the leadership required and then they can speak to your readiness. And then sometimes, depending on the job, there might be a practicum. So this could most commonly be showing up as a writing sample or additional written questions or some kind of skills assessment. Just know turnarounds, they're usually short on purpose. Don't be creative here. You can just repurpose former work that you've done in the past where you can. And if there's usually a deadline for these, but if not, ask the interviewer how long they expect candidates to spend in order to complete this task. So you can get a sense of like the level of effort or the timing of what you need to put in. So, but that being said, of course, please do your best. When I review practicums, we do a blind review. So we are really just judging the quality of your work. And then finally, salary. Most of the time, salary is negotiable. There might be a few instances where it might be harder to negotiate. So for example, if it's a union position and the start salary is set, or sometimes a salary is really clearly posted and it says that it's non-negotiable due to equity policies or things like that, then it might be the highest that it can go. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't still try, especially if you're well qualified and especially if you have the offer in hand. Just do it. Just remember that you can always negotiate things that are equally valuable, such as vacation time and PTO, work schedules, and PD opportunities. Final words of advice. So here's a chart. If you've been applying and not having a lot of success, here's like a basic chart that I often that I would refer to. So one, if you are applying but not getting screens, that either means you're either not qualified, or maybe there's a problem with your resume, application, cover letter, or maybe you were too late. So check your qualifications, revise your resume and your cover letter. Maybe you are getting screens but not getting interviews. That actually means you are meeting the minimum qualifications, but you are saying or doing something that's a red flag. So that maybe you showed up late, maybe you can't work the schedule, or you are not great on the phone and or presenting. So maybe you're not answering the question, you're way too nervous, or maybe you're answering in circles and not actually answering the question. For this, practice speaking your answers, do mock interviews, very important. If you're getting interviews, but not the job, you are qualified and you read well on paper, but you're being edged out by other candidates who are better at verbally conveying that they're the best fit for the job. Again, you've got to practice speaking your answers and do mock interviews. You have to prepare your answers a little bit better just so they're coming out more polished. So that's it. I don't know how I did on time, but I tried to kind of race through it. I'm a little over. I'm going to not ask questions because I'm over, but if you do have questions, we can talk about it in the breakout room. But right now I'm going to hand it over to Hallie.
Thanks, Akiko.
Yeah, hang on one second. Let me get out of here.
Let's see if I can share.
And Kara, feel free to boot me off if I can't press the button in time. Oh, here we go.
I think I can like share over yours.
Oh, great.
Okay. Great. So can everybody see that? Okay. Great. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you all. I'm joining from the Hammer Museum, which is at UCLA. And I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva people here at UCLA. I am the Associate Director of Academic Programs, which is what we call our education department at the Hammer Museum, kind of a mouthful, but we use the term academic programs for education. And in my current role, I have a much smaller department than Akiko has, but I have 3 full-time staff that I manage and about 20 part-time staff, some of whom, or many of whom, are UCLA undergrad and graduate students. So I'm often thinking about the kind of very emerging part of looking for jobs, of students, recent graduates, grad students, and the ways that they enter and struggle to enter the museum job market. But I also hire managers, so kind of all levels of the field. And let's see, I want to just, I'm not going to talk, that did not move. I'm not going to talk through this, but I wanted to just share like an outline of my path, to acknowledge how meandering my own path is, and to say that I think museum careers often have very meandering paths, and I think that's like important to acknowledge in our work. And I will say that I kind of started in curating, thought I wanted to curate and got an art history PhD, and then realized I didn't want to be in academia or to curate, but that I really wanted to do museum education, and had a hard time translating from academia into museum education, and ultimately kind of found my way through a job at the Getty Museum. But I think, again, there's just like a lot of different paths into this work, and I think it can be challenging to figure out how to translate your skills, but I think that's something I hope to like dig into a little more tonight with everybody. Okay, so I'm going to try to kind of build off all of the really important and wonderful things that Akiko said, and hopefully not be too repetitive. But I wanted to start by just talking about a few like tips that I always share with people before actually applying to the job. It feels kind of basic to put Google here, but I think job descriptions often have a very specific like frame to them, and are often like very conditioned by HR and certain language that, you know, HR wants us to use when sharing positions. And I think it can be really helpful just to Google the job and see who has been in it before. Maybe there are like blogs on the museum website by people in this position who are talking about their work, and that might be really helpful for you to think about as you're crafting your cover letter and getting ready for interviews. So see if you can do any extra digging and find out information about the role beyond just what is in the job description. I am a huge proponent of informational interviews. I think that no matter what stage we're at in our careers, it can be really helpful to reach out to people who are either the hiring manager for the position, people who might work at the institution that you're interested in, or people just in similar roles in other museums, and see if they're willing to chat and get a coffee and get a sense of kind of their knowledge of the job that you're interested in, the job that you're applying for. Before becoming the associate director of academic programs at the Hammer, I was a specialist for university audiences, and I just asked for like a coffee informational interview conversation with the person who was my predecessor, the old associate director, and it was so helpful to get context about the job from her before applying, and I think that like really helped me to get hired as well. And then my third tip is just if you're in the same city or the same area, to go to the museum before your interview. I think it can be really helpful to say, I just saw this exhibition and I like this piece really spoke to me, or to have some reference from actually being in the physical space of the museum. And you also might encounter a program that you might be working on in your position, or encounter some aspect of the museum that would really connect to the role that you're applying for, and then you can speak really directly to that. You also might meet people who could answer other questions that you have before applying or interviewing. So go to the museum and also see if you can chat with people who work there while you are there. Okay, so in terms of resume, I think Akiko really emphasized clarity, be as clear and concise as possible. I think that's really, really important. I would also say no more than 2 pages for a resume. And I know sometimes it's hard to cut things down to 2 pages. Sometimes it's hard to fill 2 pages, but keeping it to like something that can be printed on 2 sides of a paper. I think it can be really helpful if you have a lot of experience. I encourage people to just select what is the most relevant to the job, and you can call that section, select, in my case, museum education experience, or select curatorial experience, just so you can show what's really, really relevant to the position you're applying for and help the person who's reading your resume not get lost in the mix. If you don't have a lot of experience, you can put in experience that isn't maybe directly relevant, but work on kind of connecting it or translating it to fit that position. So if you're applying for like a gallery ambassador, gallery guard type position, and you haven't done that work, but you have customer service experience, you can talk about how you're interfacing with lots of different people all the time. Now that's a big part of that experience. So kind of making sure you're doing that translation rather than just listing the job in the same way that you would for applying for something else. That makes sense. I would also say there are different preferences around this, but I would encourage bullet points instead of paragraphs in describing your positions, your past positions on your resume. I always start by reading the resume, and often there are many and I'm moving through them somewhat quickly. And so looking for key points helps to sort of like clarify the information. I would always include dates, even if you're at something for a short time. You don't want someone to leave feeling like confused about your experience or your amount of experience. I think it's much better to be like really specific about that. So I encourage always including dates for positions that you've had, and then using active language. So keeping your I think this helps with conciseness, like just keeping your language as active as possible, not using a lot of descriptive language, being really direct about what you did in your past roles. And I'll say I'm doing the resume breakout group after, so happy to talk more about all of this. Okay, so cover letters. Again, there are some personal preferences in here. I struggle with cover letters that talk kind of broadly about passion for museum work. It's not that helpful. I think a lot of people enter this work with a lot of passion, and it's not that helpful for me as a hiring manager to know. I would rather get right into like what you will specifically bring to this position and what specifically draws you to this position. So that's personal preference, but I think it happens a lot that people start out cover letters talking about their passion or their love for this work or their love for museums. Again, use really direct language and avoid overusing adjectives, just trying to make your writing as like direct as possible. Yeah, I try to like eliminate to be verbs whenever possible, and that makes it like a little more direct and a little more active. In the cover letter, I think it's really important to show your understanding of the role and the institution. So I always am trying to look for things that indicate that this person really wants to work, not just in museum education broadly, but specifically in our department at the Hammer because of certain ways that they're connecting their experience to what we do at the Hammer, or that they're flagging certain things about our collection that they're really excited to work with. So I'm giving an example here. But yeah, trying to really show why this specific institution and this specific role is what you want and what you're looking for. Ooh, that's my timer to say 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna try to go even faster. I think cover letter is a good place to elaborate on relevant aspects of your resume. If you want to say more about specific successes that you've had in your previous positions, specific accomplishments, talk about programs that might be relevant or other things. Sorry, I'm always talking from an educator frame, and I know that's not everybody, but yeah, just having that place to elaborate and highlight things. If you have a personal commitment or mission that's relevant to the job, I think this is a nice place to share that. For example, I'm dedicated to centering student voices within the museum. That helps the hiring manager know like what I think it's in some ways a different way to talk about passion, but it helps them know what your like real drive in this work is. And then proofread, especially have someone else look it over. I think that's ideal. It can really help you identify places of not clarity. And I think especially if you can get a coworker or like former supervisor to look over your cover letter, resume too, but especially cover letter, I think that's really, really helpful. Okay, interviews. Akiko talked about this as well. I always find it helpful for myself, and I encourage others to see if you can like make a list of questions that you think will come up in the interview, and then figure out how you might answer those. And it may be that you enter the interview and your questions are off, but at least you've like thought through some things that might come up in ways that you would approach them. I think it can also be helpful to come with a list of experience or skills that you want to highlight. So I'm applying for this job that focuses on this type of work, and I have these experiences, and I want to highlight these like 3 important aspects of my experience. Preparing questions that really show your understanding of the job. I think this is where like any extra sort of Googling that you've done can help. Asking about certain aspects of the job, asking about ways that different departments work together in the institution. Yeah, questions that really show how much you're interested in the job. I think questions can often bring like a okay interview into the place of like, oh, this person's really like done their research and really was a good fit. And then I think Akiko said this as well, take notes during the interview. I think if you have a second interview, that can be really helpful. If you want to refer back to something that you've already said, just like jotting down some notes is a good interview tool for me. Okay, that's it. Good luck. I'm giving my email. I'm happy to have follow-up dialogues, and I know we'll be talking more tonight, and I'm sorry to go a bit over my time.
Oh, no, that was great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Akiko and Hallie. So just to kind of recap and ask a few questions right now, if you have any general questions, you can put them in the chat. Let me ask you both, what is the most common mistake you think new applicants should avoid? What do you think, Akiko?
The easiest one is just not remembering what was already in the job description. So like, don't ask me something that is listed there. I can't stress enough how common this is, but it is, yeah, that's a no-no. So don't do it. I would also say showing up late. Never show up late. And especially if even if it's a screen, like it's kind of almost worse if it's a screen, because it's just pick up your phone or, show up to the Google Meet. Like it's it's kind of like the first impression that you make. So if you are showing up late and you're flustered, like it's just never a good look. So don't show up late.
Mm-hmm. All right, Hallie.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's like, it can be so stressful. I want to be positive about all of these experiences, but I think having questions at the end that are like really off base can be really feels really off-putting to me. Like this person really didn't understand about the job, or like really doesn't know what they're sort of moving into or what they're interviewing for.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing. And I think also being afraid to apply for something because you're not sure if you're qualified or not. I think Akiko said this in her slides, but if you meet the minimum qualifications, I think it's worth applying. And I'm always encouraging, especially like the younger folks that I work with, to just put in the application. And I think it's a good experience to apply, even if you're not quite at the level that it seems like the position is working for or is looking for. So don't be afraid to apply for something if you're interested and you have some experience, but not all of the experience they're looking for.
Yes, I think that's.
Sorry, I just wanted to plus one that, absolutely, because usually in a job description, at least the ones that I've seen and the ones that we generate here, we'll have like minimum qualifications, and then there's like desired qualifications. So don't worry if you don't fit all the desired qualifications, as long as you met the minimum, go for it.
Yes, and I think you've probably all heard that there are studies that show that women are much more likely to want to fulfill all the qualifications and therefore don't apply, whereas men are just like, yeah, whatever. They just apply for everything. So don't worry about that. I would agree with that. And just because the other thing is, I find that sometimes the job applications, you want everything under the sun. That's what you want, the perfect person. And so we put all these things in the application. Yeah, you're going to get that? Who knows? So just because that's all in there doesn't mean that they won't look at somebody who doesn't meet every single point. What about follow-ups from prospective applicants? Are those awesome and show interest, or are those just annoying? Like I told you, I'd get back to you. What do you think, Akiko?
I think this is a personal preference for different people, but my hot take is if you applied, like you sent in a resume, but you have not been screened, or I have not spoken to you or been reached out to, don't follow up. But if we've had a screen, or if we've had an interview, we've had some kind of one-on-one personal contact, then I think it's okay to follow up. Then I know who you are, then that's fine. I just say that because usually for every position, we get a lot of applicants. And if you have a question like, oh, did my application go through? I would actually, usually there's an email that will go to the HR department, and they can verify for you if you're concerned that the application, that, whether you received the application. But if you're actually if you're digging around and trying to find who the hiring manager is and contact me, oh, did you get my resume? I'm going to find that very annoying if I did not interview you.
All right, Hallie.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think if you have something to add, maybe to say, I just want to reiterate how interested I am in this position, and to share that I've just done this program that feels really relevant. I think that can be like a helpful, it's helpful for me to see, oh, there's more you're adding to your application, and it might help me to flag you as I'm looking through applications. I think I absolutely look for a follow-up after the interview. That's kind of different, but if I'm interviewing 5 people and 3 of them send a follow-up email, that it is oh, I wonder if that 4th and 5th person weren't that interested, so I really want that follow-up. I also think it's a tricky question, because I think it kind of depends on what level of the job you're at and what level of your the field you're at. So we get a lot of student applications for jobs, and they're often following up not with the direct hiring manager, but with our kind of department coordinator, who can easily say we'll be reviewing these later than we thought next month, and then we'll get back to you then. But if you're following up with a higher up in the department, it can feel like more of a toll. So maybe I don't know if I totally answered that, but I think if you have something extra to share, that is much more warranted of a follow-up than just checking in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that also sometimes as the applicant, you're looking for a job, you want a response that's a little bit sooner. I've been applying for jobs, or I have applied for jobs where it was a 6-month process. So in month 4, you're kind of like, are they going to decide yet? So it can take a while. And so from the applicant's point of view, it can seem, so I would just say, have some patience with that. Sometimes it does take longer than we want it to, but that's because the people are being thoughtful and there's just other things going on. But so just be considerate when you're thinking about following up. And also, I think something brief is better than something that's, just checking in kind of thing, versus I have a whole nother thing I want to tell you about myself that I forgot about or something, I think might also keep it more digestible for the person at the other end. I know we talked about resumes, and you'll be hosting, Hallie, the resume breakout group, but just sort of in general, and also before I ask this question, if you have a question, please pop it into the chat, and we'll be looking for questions and to answer your questions as well. So for resumes, can you be a little bit more specific about what you're looking for in a resume? What as the applicant, what are we looking for from the job description to put into the resume? What helps us? How can we help ourselves get through that first filter? Hallie?
Yeah, I can share that I usually make like a sort of like a rubric that's like, okay, these are like the top 4 areas of experience I want this position to have. And then as I'm looking through resumes, I'm sort of like checking off those 4. So my advice might be to like, figure out what the top experience that this person really should have, and try to highlight that in your resume. I think for those of us who like receive a lot of applications and who are often looking at them quickly, like being able to sort of like, check off that, like, okay, this person has this, and this seems great. Okay, I'll highlight them and move them to the next round of review.
Okay. Akiko?
I would say a big clue for me is what is in the job description. So when you look at, when I draft a job description, I'll actually put the most important qualifications towards the top. Like I'll stack it. So it'll say like, minimum qualifications and then the desired qualifications. The first 3 to 5 bullets, absolutely the first 3 bullets. Those are what I'm like looking for. So ideally in a resume, I want to see experience or maybe language that shows those, like that mirrors either that direct experience and or the skills that I'm looking for that job. So yeah, I would say 1 big clue, look at the job description and then look at the first 3 to 5 bullets. Just because when I'm drafting job descriptions, I will draft just like how I assume that with resumes that, we're doing a quick pass and we want the most important stuff on top. That goes the same for job descriptions. You should assume that the stuff that's the most important is stacked towards the top.
Okay. Does anybody out in the audience have any questions? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I know that when I'm writing my cover letter, you talk a little bit more about cover letters because, I find so many times now, sometimes people don't send a cover letter. And I think that applicants underestimate the importance of a cover letter. Maybe you can talk a little bit about why a cover letter is important and how that can definitely help boost your application. Akiko?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think cover letters, to me, it is frankly, it's like an assessment of your ability to write. So like especially if I'm looking for a position, and most of the positions I hire for require a degree of written communication, whether that's emails or making announcements or newsletter, whatever it is, so I need to see, or I would like to see how do you write? And it's not going to show, it may not show me exactly everything. This is just one example, but if you don't send a cover letter, I'm not seeing that. And that's a whole piece that you are, kind of missing out an opportunity to showcase, oh, look, this is how I write. This is my style or of communication and so forth. So I would also see the cover letter. It's an opportunity, like make me read this interview, this cover letter and think, oh man, I definitely have to interview this person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hallie, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree. I also see there's a few questions coming in the chat, but I'll just add Oh, I just totally lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? I think it's also, I said this earlier, but I think it's also the place to like really highlight why this job, why this museum. The resume is a general thing that you'll send to lots of places, but the cover letter, you can be more nuanced and more specific.
All right, thank you. All right, so we got a couple of questions here. Just real quickly, what do you think about bolding phrases in resumes or cover letters? Do you think, is that helpful, or does that detract? Is that a personal preference? Hallie?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Hallie.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just gonna say I'm actually neutral about it. I would say that what's more important is brevity. Like, I don't want to see a 2-page cover letter. Mm-hmm. So like if your cover letter's that long that you need to start bolding things, maybe just shorten your cover letter a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, I don't love it, but I do think it's like a personal style thing. But I think I want to see that you can like highlight these things in your writing rather than just highlighting them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And Daniel has a question about negotiations. Would you recommend first-time applicants or newcomers to try their hand at negotiating? How far should we test our hand, and if it backfires, could it affect us in the long run? Hallie?
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
I'll mention this just because I mentioned this during my presentation. Generally, I recommend, yes, it never hurts to negotiate, but I will say you have to know when to do it. You should not negotiate if you don't have an offer in hand. So the assumption is that you have interviewed, have gone through the whole process, they've extended an offer to you, and they say, we'd like you to join our team, then it's time to negotiate. So that's one, make sure you're timing it correctly. How far should you test it? I mean, negotiation should not be an endless back and forth process. My recommendation is look at the job description. If they have posted the salary, keep that in mind. If they have a range, that's when you really should be thinking about, how do I apply my experience to the range that's being presented? And how can I position myself in the negotiation to show that I actually am worth X number of dollars based on the range that's been presented? So you should have reason. You can't just throw out like, oh, I want this. Like, of course, we all want more money, but you have to be able to show to the person that is hiring you that here's my, thank you for your offer. Always thank them. I considered, I looked at the package that you sent me, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the salary that I'd like to ask for, and here's why. So you should have those things prepared and ready as you negotiate. It backfires if what you ask for is totally unreasonable. Then it's like, where is this person coming from? But if you're negotiating within a reasonable kind of scope, whether that's within the range of the salary that's being presented, or if if the salary can't be negotiated, then you're asking for like, oh, well, if you're asking questions around like, oh, can I negotiate PTO? Is there a flexible work schedule? What opportunities for professional development are there? It's very good to know what other things, which may not be salary or money, are also worth it to you to gain in this position, and you can ask those questions, and those things are all fair game during negotiation, but don't do it until you have an offer.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think having a sense of the salary for that role at other institutions can also be a really helpful like argument point. Like I know that, I've looked at, there's so many nice like museum salary transparency resources. Like I know that people in this position usually make within this range at other institutions. I really need my next step to be within that range. I think that can be like a helpful tool as well. And I think I agree, like I think it's always worth asking, and as Akiko said, like being able to say, this is why I'm asking for more. Yeah,
and I think it's a really good point also about the whole package. As someone who needs to have medical insurance as part of my package, looking at different ones, sometimes that makes a huge difference. And days off and things like that. So I think it's a good tip also to just be cognizant of how else you're being compensated, that the compensation package isn't just the number for the salary that you're getting. And it's also partly thinking about your hours, I'm also in education. And so thinking about working at night and working on weekends, how much of my job is that? And am I good with that? Or am I like, it's a little bit challenging because I have a family or whatever. So thinking all of that. And Daniel has a follow-up. If it isn't listed, well, first of all, in California, I believe it's required now, isn't it, to include the salary in the, yes, it's required. So it should be there now. And if it's not, that's to me, that's a huge red flag because that means that the poster doesn't know the basic legal requirements, and that could leak into all kinds of other things. I have seen this myself in different ways, in job ads. It always, to me, is a red flag. And so asking if things are negotiable before negotiating.
I think once you have the offer, you just move into negotiating. Yeah.
Yeah, I would, at least for me, I expect it. It doesn't mean that I can always deliver, because again, if it's like a union position, there are certain jobs where it's like, I actually can't negotiate because this is the start, or this is the contract that's been pre-negotiated on your behalf by the unit. So unless it's like that, I'm expecting it.
All right. We have a question about working abroad. Is there any specific tips for higher salary job interviews for positions working in museums abroad? Not sure that's within the scope of your experience. Akiko?
Yeah, I don't have that experience. I'm not sure. I can't speak to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't speak from a hiring manager perspective. I have worked abroad, but I mean, I would say a lot of the same negotiation things I would apply here. With salary, I actually would say it depends on the culture. I think the country that you're applying for may have different practices, and you might need to go through a different process. So it depends on the country. And then I might actually also advise, especially if you are looking for the higher salary job interviews. So I'm assuming, like, if you're looking for like a director level or an executive level position, I would advise that you work maybe with a search firm, or work with like a company that assists other museums to hire. And usually, typically, those recruiters, those search firm folks will be able to give you guidance on what you need to provide in order to go through a process for another country.
I think that's a really good tip for even in the US for higher level positions. A lot of times now museums are going to a search firm. So I think that's a good point. Amelia's asking, is it helpful or harmful to apply to several positions at the same institution if you are truly interested in the organization and are trying to find a way in the door? Yeah, I'm curious about that because I've done that. I've applied for multiple jobs at the same place, knowing that the same people are looking at this resume for different jobs. What do you think? Akiko?
I would say it depends. I think if the two positions that you're applying for are similar in level, or maybe there's a lot of crossover. So for example, like the team that I hire for is like interpretive education. If there is kind of a similar level position, but in a different department, or maybe it's a visitor facing role in our visitor services department, and you're applying for that as well, I can make the connection. And like that makes sense to me. But if you are applying for an entry level role with me, but then you're applying for a managerial role somewhere else, that to me is a red flag. And so just keep in mind that there's a level that you should stay in, because it's bad either way, because it shows that either you're overqualified for one position or you're really underqualified for another. So I would advise, like, try to hire within the same level. And then also know that at most museums, managers will share that information, or HR will flag it. They'll say, hey, just letting you know, this person's also in this other role. So, just know that, consider that like known information. It's not going to fly under the radar.
Anything to add, Hallie? Yeah.
No, I'm in complete agreement. And I'll also say that, like, if you're doing that, be very careful to make sure that you are like listing the right position. This seems like so stupid, but I have definitely had applicants who have like listed the wrong position at the Hammer in their cover letter, and I'm assuming they're applying to both, and that's like a real red flag. Yeah.
Yes, details matter. We're about ready to go into our breakout rooms. We can maybe come back to some of these other questions, or we can answer these questions, in some other format. All right, fantastic. I hope that went well for everyone and you got some really good information. Akiko or Hallie, do you have any closing thoughts? Akiko?
Just that if anyone wants to follow up with me, like I'll put my email in the chat. They're welcome to, send me any questions if they want to run anything by me. I try to be responsive, and I'm welcome. I welcome that if anyone would like to follow up with anything.
All right, and Hallie?
Hey, it's been great to I just said this to my breakout room too, but it's been really nice to have this dialogue, and I wish everybody the best of luck in future job applications and searching. And I know it's like a tough field, and one that's like really driven by everybody's love for this work, and that can feel exciting and sometimes discouraging. But I think it's really important to have dialogues like this where we can all get together and talk about it. And I'll share my email again. And I also forgot to say this when I shared it earlier, but I'm like quite pregnant and due in a few weeks. And so I can receive emails in the next few weeks, and then I will be off the email for the summer and then back in the fall. So if you reach out to me and don't hear from me, that's what's going on. And I'm happy to follow up once I'm back at work.
Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to Akiko and Hallie for participating and sharing your valuable information with us. This is the last in our season. This is the last workshop in our series for this season. So please join Cultural Connections in the fall. We usually have a museum trivia night to launch off our networking and have a little bit of fun in the fall. So look for that in October and November. I think we're posting the survey in the chat. Is that there? Yes, so you can see the chats there. Also, I had put in a little bit earlier the website for Cultural Connections. You can always just look us up. So again, thank you to Akiko Minaga, Director of Explainers at Exploratorium, and Hallie Scott, the Associate Director of Academic Programs at the Hammer Museum of UCLA. And of course, Kara Dodge for hosting one of our groups and doing tech for us, and Mercy Bertero, who's not here, but worked on this program as well and helped with the survey that we're hoping you will all take. Thank you. We really appreciate that. And we do look at that information. So thank you again, and hope to see you soon. Good luck, everybody.